So thank you for joining me for today's session, which is around the Team Leader, Supervisor Level 3 and Operations Departmental Manager Level 5. So my name is Lisa Williams and I am the lead IQA endpoint assessor for the Team Leader, Supervisor and Operational Manager standards. I've been working with Pearson for coming up for a few years now as an endpoint assessor and in the lead IQA coming up just to the year mark. But I have worked in the education sector for over 10 years now in a variety of roles such as an assessor, IQA and managing centres. So the purpose of today's session is to go over the endpoint assessment components for both Team Leader, Supervisor and Operations Departmental Manager. We're also going to go over how endpoint assessment compares to on programme and how you can use a notification of results in order to progress your apprentices further or to look at areas that you may need to address if the apprentice needs to resit any of the components. So we're going to look at the endpoint assessment components and documentation first. So we are going to run over both Team Leader, Supervisor and the Operations Departmental Manager Level 5. So I am going to go over each component and give you some key information around them that hopefully you can apply if you're not already doing so, to hopefully ensure that your apprentices are successful first time around and that they're achieving fabulous marks in order to achieve that distinction grade overall. So we're going to focus on the Team Leader Supervisor standard first. So it's a level 3 standard which has 4 components in regards to the endpoint assessment. Now, none of the components should be undertaken by the apprentice until Gateway has been signed off on ACE360. I do need to stress that to yourselves. If any component is done beforehand, that would void that outcome for the apprentice. So once Gateway is signed off, the apprentice can move forward with the components. Now in Team Leader Supervisor, there isn't a set order within the rules. However, I have laid these out in the order that we recommend as an organisation. The reason being is that we feel these work quite well after trial and error, and it's a good way to ease the apprentice into the endpoint assessment. So the first area that we've got is a multiple choice exam in which the apprentice has 45 minutes to complete the multiple choice questions. There's 30 questions and they need to achieve at least 50% in order to be successful for that component. It is multiple choice, so obviously apprentices should be encouraged to have a go at providing a response with the questions, and as I say, they don't need to get full marks, it is just the 50%. Now we do have a practice multiple choice exam on the ACE360 resources element of the page, which you can access, including the mark scheme for that as well, if that's something that you'd like to undertake to help prepare your apprentices. We then have the portfolio of evidence. So the portfolio of evidence is one of the main areas where apprentices are falling down, and I will go through some of the reasons for that in a moment. But the portfolio of evidence is where the apprentice is expected to provide specific examples along with supporting evidence to show how they've applied their skills, knowledge and behaviour throughout the apprenticeship period. So the portfolio does look at a range of areas, so things like finance, project management, leading people, communication, as well as some others. And the portfolio is out of 20. So there's 20 questions in which the apprentice needs to address with their specific example, along with the evidence to back up that information. Now, each question is worth 1 mark for the portfolio. And again, in order to achieve a pass, they need to achieve at least 50% of the marks. Now, those marks can come from any area within that portfolio. So if they don't get any marks in the area of finance, that's not going to impact them as long as they can achieve the 10 marks overall from anywhere in that portfolio. Now, as I mentioned, the portfolio of evidence is an area that we do see a lot of apprentices falling down, and that is for various reasons. The main ones that we see are that the apprentice is not providing supporting evidence to back up the example that they are providing. Now, within the portfolio, we do need that evidence. So even if they give a fantastic example of when they've managed a project, Without that supporting evidence, we are unable to award that mark to them. Likewise, if the example's not great and the evidence is fantastic, again, we're still not able to apply that mark. So they do need both components in order to get that one mark for that area. Other areas that we see apprentices falling down on is in regards to the context of their information. So they talk very generically around the information, so what they would do, or they use the term we throughout their information. Now, as an endpoint assessor, that doesn't make it clear on what that apprentice's role was during that example, and we're not allowed to assume that they are referring to themselves. They do need to give specific examples, so they're not able to talk about what they would do. We do need information of what they actually have done, because it's about them, how they've applied those skills in real life. These examples and evidence also need to come from during their apprenticeship period. So if they are given examples and evidence outside of this, so before their start date, we're unable to take that into consideration. So this is where it is key that you ensure as providers that that information on ACE 360 is accurate and up to date in regards to the apprentice's contact information and their start date of their apprenticeship, because that is used by the independent endpoint assessors to ensure that obviously we are looking at evidence and information within that apprenticeship period. So the portfolio of evidence, as I say, is an area we are seeing improvements, but that is an area that unfortunately the apprentices do tend to fall down on. And as I've mentioned, it is important that the apprentice talks about their role within that, as without that, we're not able to give that mark. We then have the competency-based interview in which the apprentice has 1 hour and 30 minutes to address 20 questions, again across a range of different areas. So again, these are areas such as communication, finance, project management, leading people, as well as others. And within this, we do expect, again, the apprentice to give specific examples of how they've undertaken these activities. Now, with the competency-based interview, the apprentice doesn't have to back up their verbal information with any supporting evidence, but we do need the specific examples. Again, the apprentice needs to talk about their actions. So again, if they say, we undertook a project, we used a Gantt chart, we reviewed this on a monthly basis, that again doesn't give that independent endpoint assessor a clear understanding of what that apprentice's role was within that. So again, it's about making sure your apprentices are prepared to talk in the correct term in regards to I did this, I did that, and this is how I did it. So for the competency-based interview, they do have 1 hour and a half. However, we can go over that time by 10% if we need to do so, to ensure that the apprentice gets through as many questions as possible within that time. However, once we do hit that 10% tolerance, the component does have to be brought to a close, whether all questions have been posed or not. We do apply an holistic approach in the interview and also the portfolio of evidence. So if an apprentice has addressed something without being asked a question, through another response, we are able to award it. Or likewise, in the portfolio, if they reference something and it doesn't fit, but we can find it elsewhere, then we can apply it. In the interview, they need to achieve 50% in order to pass the component. And again, those marks can come from anywhere within that interview. It doesn't matter if they haven't got anything correct in a certain section, as long as they're achieving that 50%. So the interview for team leader supervisor is calculated out of 30, even though there is 20 questions. So they do need to achieve at least 15 marks out of that. For the interview, they are able to bring along supporting evidence if they wish to do so. However, that is entirely the apprentice's choice, and only the verbal information is being assessed within the interview. Apprentices are able to bring along a pen and paper to make notes of the questions being posed. That is absolutely fine. However, any notes the apprentice does make will be asked to be destroyed at the end of the component. I do need to stress that if the apprentice brings any notes with them, they are not permitted in the assessment. And when we say supporting evidence, that would be things like product evidence, such as a personal development plan, emails, witness testimonies, anything like that are absolutely fine. However, reflective accounts from the apprentice or pre-written notes are not permitted. We then have the professional discussion. So the professional discussion does work very differently to the interview in that the apprentice will take the lead on the professional discussion. They have 45 minutes in which to address an overarching question, and we are able to prompt the apprentice if we need to do so. However, they are preset prompts. In the interview, we are able to prompt, but we are able to create our own prompts based around the information that the apprentice gives. And in the interview, we are restricted to 2 prompts per section. So with the professional discussion, the apprentice needs to talk around their learning and development while on the apprenticeship period. So again, this is where the apprenticeship start date on ACE is key and ensuring that it's correct. If the apprentice does start to talk around things prior to the apprenticeship period, this won't be taken into consideration. The professional discussion, once the apprentice has delivered all of their information, we are then able to apply the preset prompts if we need to do so. However, we're not able to deviate from those. So this is where apprentices do sometimes fall down if they state the term "we" throughout all of their information. Again, it doesn't give us that clear indication of what their role was, and we're unable to prompt to identify what that was. So again, preparation is key in getting that apprentice to use the correct terminology when delivering their information. Again, they can bring supporting evidence, so they are allowed to have a personal development plan or a CPD log or any other supporting evidence that's relevant. That is absolutely fine, but again, notes are not permitted. The apprentice can make a note of the question that's being posed, and they can refer back to that, and they can get us to repeat that question as many times as they wish to do so. But again, at the end, we will ask them to destroy that question because it is a controlled assessment. So in order to achieve the component, again, they need to achieve at least 50% for that area, and it is marked out of 20, so they need to get a mark of at least 10 in order to pass that. So for team leader supervisor, each component is either graded a fail or pass. That is the highest that the apprentice can achieve in each component. However, their total marks are then tallied together to give them their overall grading, which will then give them the fail, pass, merit or distinction. So they do need to get at least 50% in each component to be able to pass overall as well. So hopefully the more prepared that they are, the more successful they're going to be in achieving that distinction rate. Just to advise with team leader, the outcome isn't capped, so if they do need to resit a component, they would still be able to achieve a distinction overall based on their overall marks. So the next thing we're going to look at is operations departmental manager. So again, I have laid these out in an order that we prefer to undertake them in person. Again, we find it works quite well and eases the apprentice in. However, it's not setting the standard that they have to be done in a particular order. So for the operations departmental manager level 5, there is 5 components in which the apprentice needs to undertake. And again, all of these have to be done once Gateway has been signed and completed. Again, if the apprentice is undertaking the exam before that has occurred, that would void the exam. So again, they have a multiple choice exam in which they have a range of questions, and again, the apprentice needs to achieve at least 50% out of those questions. They can again be from any questions, it doesn't matter as long as they're achieving that 50%, and they get 45 minutes in which to answer those. Again, we do have a practice paper on ACE 360 within the resource area that you can access and issue to your candidates if you wish to do so. We then have the project presentation. So this is where the candidate is expected to have undertaken a project during their apprenticeship period, and then they are expected to present that to the independent endpoint assessor on the assessment day. Now, the component is a maximum of 30 minutes. However, the apprentice is only permitted to present for 15 minutes of that 30 minutes. They're not able to go over that, and if the apprentice is still delivering after that 15-minute mark, we would have to bring them to a close. So that is quite a tight time constraint for the apprentice in which to deliver their information. So again, preparation is key to make sure that they're confident and know the information that they're delivering to us. They are able to have some prompt cards or bullet point notes, that's absolutely fine, but scripts would not be permitted for the apprentice. Once the apprentice has finished delivering their information, the independent endpoint assessor then has 15 minutes in which to pose 3 questions to that apprentice, which are preset, and which we would expect the apprentice to address those questions. We're not able to apply any other questions or prompts within the project presentation other than those preset ones. Again, in the project presentation, we are looking for information on what the apprentice has done. So again, if they do use the term we throughout, that is going to impact because we're unable to identify what their role or responsibilities were within that project. The project should have been undertaken during the apprenticeship period, ideally towards the last 6 months of the apprenticeship. If the project is discovered to have started before the apprenticeship period, again, that is going to impact as we will be unable to consider that information as the project shouldn't have been started until the apprentice was on their apprenticeship. So again, these start dates on ACE360 are really important to make sure that they are correct because the independent endpoint assessors do look at those and the information and presentation that the apprentice is providing. Any technology that the apprentice wants to use for their presentation is absolutely fine, but it is their responsibility to make sure that that is available and in full working order on the day and that they know how to navigate that. Obviously, at the moment, we are doing a lot of these virtually via Zoom. That's absolutely fine. And we do make apprentices aware that we have obviously the option to share screens so they can do that with ourselves. Now, the project presentation should be made available on ACE360 no later than 5 working days before the component to ensure that our independent endpoint assessors can review that information prior to the day so they know the topic that the apprentice is going to be delivering. In order to pass the component, the apprentice needs to achieve 50%, and again, that 50% can come from anywhere within the project presentation as long as they get that 50% overall. We then have the portfolio of evidence. So again, very similar to the team leader supervisor, that covers a range of areas. So again, things like project management, finance, communication, a range of subject areas. There's 20 questions, and in order to achieve the component, the apprentice does need to achieve at least 50% overall. Now, it's not about quantity, it's about quality. So the juicier the evidence, hopefully the better and more criteria the apprentice is going to achieve. We do see it sometimes where portfolios are submitted with over 100 pieces of evidence. However, that still hasn't necessarily resulted in a positive outcome. They are able to use the examples and evidence for more than one criteria. If they feel it's sufficient enough, that is absolutely fine. So hopefully if they're really detailed and good examples and evidence, they will cross over into other areas. That is not a problem. As I say, we do take an holistic approach. So although the apprentice may have referenced something, if it doesn't cover and we can locate it elsewhere within the portfolio, we will award that. Again, I must stress that they do need to give specific examples of when they've undertaken the activity, and again, they need to back it up with the evidence. One without the other, and we're unable to award that mark. Again, just be careful of the context of the information that the apprentice is using within that information. Make sure that it is clear that it is around what their roles and responsibilities were, and that that evidence also goes with the example that they are giving. Sometimes we do have an example by an apprentice, but the evidence they put into support relates to a totally different subject that they haven't spoken about. So the portfolio of evidence, we do ask that you upload these no later than 5 working days prior to the interview and professional discussion for the team leader, and the same for operations departmental manager. Again, they are quite time consuming things to review, and that just allows us to have a good look through the portfolio prior to those days. So if there is any areas we could potentially question around, we can do that on the assessment day. You would upload this to the shared area of ACE where the IEAs can access that. We are happy to access e-portfolio systems, that's not a problem, but we would need to be set up with access to that, again, no later than 5 working days prior to the other assessment components. We've then got the competency-based interview. So again, they get an hour and 30 minutes within the operations departmental manager to address the 20 questions. And again, they're looking for 50% in order to achieve that component. And again, that can come from any area. They are allowed to make notes within the assessment, again, of the question. That's absolutely fine. And that can be quite useful, that apprentices do sometimes refer back to that. It just gives them that light bulb moment to bring them back on track. Supporting evidence, again, is permitted. So things like emails, witness testimonies, personal development plans, they are absolutely fine. However, again, we would only be taking the verbal information the apprentice provides and not reviewing the documents that they've brought into that assessment. They are able to go under the hour and 30 minutes. That's not a problem if the apprentice goes under the maximum time. But again, once we hit that maximum time, we're unable to do anything further if they've not got through all of the questions. So again, if they can manage their responses quite well and be to the point, hopefully they will get through the questions, which will hopefully result in an overall positive outcome. We are able, again, to prompt the apprentice within the interview, but again, we are limited to 2 prompts per section. So that means, for example, in the area of project management, we have 2 prompts. In the area of finance, 2 prompts. Once those 2 prompts are used, we're unable to apply anything further, and we would just move on if the apprentice has still not provided sufficient information. We do class prompts as things such as rewording of a question, to extract more information or clarify with the apprentice, or if we have to reword it for them, or if we've asked for 2 examples and they've only provided 1 and we have to prompt for the second. We are able to repeat the question as many times as the apprentice needs, and that doesn't count as a prompt, so that's absolutely fine. It would also class as a prompt if we have to identify what the apprentice's role was. So if we use the term "we" throughout their information and we have to ask them what their role was within that, that would class as a prompt. And then finally, we've got the professional discussion. So again, in order to achieve the component, they would need to hit at least 50%. And we have 45 minutes in which the apprentice will talk about their learning and development. Like with team leader, this area is again where the apprentice would lead. So they would be posed the overarching question and then they would deliver all their information that they wanted to do so around their learning and development. If they do that in under 45 minutes, that is absolutely fine. But again, once we get to that maximum time of the 45 and then the 10% tolerance, we would have to bring that component to a close. We will listen to the information that the apprentice provides and reference that accordingly. And then if we need to do so, we will apply the preset prompts. But again, like the level 3, we're not able to deviate from those prompts. So again, if the apprentice does refer to "we" or talks about their team's development throughout, we are unable to do anything in regards to that. And that can obviously have quite a big impact. Again, they can bring in supporting evidence, so a personal development plan, CPD log, that is absolutely fine and permitted within the rules. But again, we would only be assessing their verbal responses. So even though I may see a detailed development plan with smart learning and development goals, if the apprentice doesn't deliver that information verbally to me and their responses aren't sufficient, I would have to mark that as a fail, even though I may see a document that is quite detailed and could hit the criteria. They are able again to make notes of the question, that's absolutely fine, and we are able to repeat that question for them as many times as they need us to do so. Again, in each of these components for operational departmental manager, they are all graded as a fail or a pass. And again, it's their overall marks for the components that are totaled together to give them the fail, pass, merit or distinction grade overall. But again, to get that pass mark, they do need to have hit 50% in each component. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move on in regards to key points for the 2 standards. Again, so you can make sure that your apprentices are coming as prepared as possible, and obviously you can make sure that things are put in place to try and prevent some of these common themes that we're seeing. So for team leader supervisor, as I mentioned, supporting evidence is permitted, such as witness statements, emails, in the competency-based interview and professional discussion. So it is entirely up to the apprentice, it's not mandatory. However, if they wanted to bring that along, that is absolutely fine. But as I've mentioned, it is only their verbal responses that we will be assessing. Notes are not permitted within the interview or professional discussion. If an apprentice does come with notes, we will have to ask them to remove them from the assessment area. They are permitted to bring along pen and paper to note down the question, and this does work quite well for some apprentices, as they tend to digest the question quite well when they write it down. They have a read over it, and it can also help bring them back on track when they're giving their response, when they review back over that question. In order to achieve a mark in the portfolio, both the information and supporting evidence have to be sufficient. So as I've mentioned, one without the other, we are unable to award the mark. Again, if they talk generically or around what they would do, again, we're unable to give them that mark as well. So it does have to be specific examples. So Operations Departmental Manager Level 5, so you will see it is quite similar again in regards to the areas. So again, in the project presentation, notes are permitted, but these must be brief notes. So prompt cards, bullet points are absolutely fine, but we wouldn't allow the apprentice to read from a script. Again, supporting evidence is permitted within the interview and professional discussion. So again, witness statements, emails, personal development plans are absolutely fine, but if an apprentice comes in with a reflective account or any other form of notes, that would not be permitted. So as I've just mentioned, no notes, but again, they can bring along a pen and paper to make notes of the question when they're in the assessment. Again, we just ask at the end that they do destroy those questions. So like the team leader portfolio, again, they do need to give the detailed information and supporting evidence in order to achieve a mark in the portfolio. Again, the context of that information needs to be correct as well. So as I've touched upon already today, each component for team leader and for operations departmental manager is either graded a fail or pass. They're not able to achieve any higher than a pass in any of the components. If an apprentice does have to be prompted, that doesn't go against them in any way. It doesn't impact on their grading. Likewise, if they go under the time, that's absolutely fine. That doesn't impact. Or if they have to use an additional 10% tolerance, again, that doesn't impact on the grading, but obviously it could mean that they've not got through all of the questions. So to achieve a pass in any of the components, as I've mentioned on quite a few occasions, they need to achieve a score of at least 50%, and that 50% can come from any areas within the component. Once the apprentice has undertaken all of the components, we can then apply the final grade, and all the totals are tallied together to give that overall grade. So as I mentioned, it would be a fail if the apprentice has not achieved at least 50% in all of the components. So if they have got 50% in the exam, the interview and professional discussion, but they haven't in the portfolio of evidence, that overall grade is going to be a fail. And we are unable to apply an overall grade until all components have been attempted. And as I've mentioned, if the apprentice does have to resit any component, that doesn't impact in regards to the overall grading. It doesn't mean that they can only get a pass on their resit. They are able to still achieve a distinction overall. That is absolutely fine. It's not capped in team leader or operations departmental manager. If an apprentice is unsuccessful in an area, so if they are unsuccessful in the interview or professional discussion with team leader, they would have to go through the whole component again. So they would have to go through all 20 questions in the interview in order to hopefully achieve their pass. In regards to the portfolio of evidence, if the apprentice does fail on the first attempt and they get 8 out of 20, when they resit that component, the 8 marks that they've achieved from the first attempt would still stand, and we would just be looking at the areas the apprentice didn't achieve in the first attempt to hopefully take that mark up over to the 50%. Operations departmental managers, exactly the same. So again, the portfolio of evidence, the marks achieved in the first attempt would still stand. But for the project presentation, interview or professional discussion, if they are unsuccessful in those areas, they would have to go through the whole component again. We do sometimes get apprentices that come to us that have been informed that unfortunately they only have to address the questions in the interview that they're unsuccessful in, or and the same with the project presentation and discussion. That is not the case. They do have to go through the whole component again. So some key things then for preparation. So hopefully these are being used, but just to highlight them in case anyone's not aware of them, we do have the additional resources document for both team leader, supervisor and for operational departmental manager. These documents can be found on the resource area for ACE 360, along with specification document and also the multiple choice practice paper and also the portfolio logbook that the apprentices can use as well. So these are key documents to help prepare your apprentices. So hopefully these are being used, and hopefully that will ensure that the apprentice is successful when moving forward with their endpoint assessment. So in regards to the additional resources document, this is a screenshot of the team leader level 3 additional resources document, and it does provide key information around all areas of the team leader endpoint assessment. So the screenshot that you can see there, that is a component around the portfolio of evidence. So you can see it's around the skills area leading people, and then we have assessment criteria 1, which states that the apprentice must give an example of when they've communicated organisational strategy and team purpose to own team, adapting communication style to suit different audiences. On the right-hand side, it then also documents the types of evidence that can be provided and what the apprentice must provide in relation to that response. So these are real key documents in making sure your apprentice is prepared as possible. These can be issued to apprentices and should hopefully be being used throughout their apprenticeship period to get them ready for that endpoint assessment. I have placed a note at the bottom of the pages that the information can be found for the various components. So we have the knowledge test, which is on pages 2 to 53, the portfolio of evidence, which is page 54 to 96, the competency-based interview, which is page 97 to 100, and the professional discussion, which is a page 101 to 105. So as I mentioned, these are now stored on our ACE 360 system, so you can access those, and they are the most up-to-date versions as well, so you can make sure that obviously the apprentice is working to the correct version. And as I mentioned, these are good for helping getting them prepared for when they get to us for endpoint assessment. So we also have the same documents for operational departmental manager as well. So the screenshot I've included here is a snippet from the additional resources document in relation to the competency-based interview. So again, this is looking at the operational management area, and it then shows you the assessment criteria question 1 to 6 and the expected responses that the apprentice should be giving. Again, what I've done is I've placed on there the areas that you can locate information around all of the endpoint assessment areas for the operational departmental manager. So again, for the knowledge test, page 3 to 54, portfolio of evidence, page 55 to 104, competency-based interview, page 105 to 110, project presentation, page 111 to 125, and the professional discussion, page 126 to 130. So you can find key information in there for the apprentice, and again, that can be used to help them get prepared. And again, this is contained on the ACE 360 system, along with the specification document, templates for the portfolio as well that they can use in regards to submitting their information, the multiple choice practice test. So endpoint assessment. So what's different between endpoint assessment and on-programme? So we do find that sometimes there is still some confusion around this, and this is sometimes where apprentices are falling down when they get to us. So on programme, the apprentice is able to undertake a range of visits and assessments over a lengthy period of time. So they're able to get used to that trainer, they're able, if they don't get something at the first time, to continue to work towards it, to develop their knowledge, skills and behaviours. In regards to endpoint assessment, they get that one shot on that day with us, and it is carried out under exam conditions. So they only have that 1 hour and a half of the interview, for example, to sell themselves. So that can be quite a bit of a shock to the apprentice, that they're meeting us for the first time. We're asking them all these questions and they've got to sell themselves and give us that information clearly and sufficiently. On-programme apprentices can be supported by their trainer or coach, and obviously that is what you guys are there for. You go over the year and a half to support them and develop them. Obviously, with endpoint assessment, the independent endpoint assessor does have to remain impartial. We're not able to support them in any way, and we're not able to assume. So obviously we don't want to set them up to fail, and we'd like to put them at ease, but we're not able, if they're not able to answer something, to steer them into that direction or lead them. Apprentices can revisit an area over a period of time. So as I mentioned, if they are a bit weaker on something, they can go back over it. Whereas in endpoint assessment, as I mentioned, they've got to prove themselves in that assessment on that day and on that time. If the apprentices use the term "we" or a generic example, in assessment and on programme, we can normally infer we know what they mean, and that's absolutely fine. However, in endpoint assessment world, we're not allowed to do that. It's very black and white. We're not allowed to infer. It's either there or it isn't. Work submitted by the apprentice may receive feedback that is sufficient by the trainer or coach. We do find in endpoint assessment, we do get a lot of apprentices saying, well, I've been told that that was okay, or that I've done my ILM, so I've achieved the apprenticeship standard, and that's not automatically the case. The apprentice does need to show that they've got the knowledge, skills and behaviours to us. And unfortunately, although it may be acceptable on programme, it doesn't mean that that is automatically going to fit the endpoint assessment. I do know a lot of apprentices are undertaking qualification alongside their apprenticeship to support them, such as ILM, and that is absolutely fine. However, this doesn't automatically mean that that is going to fit the endpoint assessment or they're going to achieve that criteria. We do see a lot of portfolios that have ILM mark sheets in, or certificates submitted as evidence, or workbooks with generic questions and answers which don't fit, as obviously they're not specific examples. So although it can assist them, it doesn't automatically mean that they're going to pass or achieve that area within the endpoint assessment. So it's just making sure that that apprentice is aware that they do need to talk about that information, and just providing a certificate, unfortunately, doesn't support anything. In the endpoint assessment as well, each component is standalone for both team leader and operational departmental manager. So although they may have given a fantastic example of supporting evidence in the portfolio, if in the interview when we're talking around that subject area they're not able to sufficiently address it, we're not able to take the portfolio into consideration in that instance. They do need to hit the mark in each separate component. Endpoint assessment as well, they do come with a time restriction. So again, that can be quite challenging for apprentices. Obviously on programme, they're not particularly timed to give their information or response, where in endpoint assessment, we do have timeframes and we have to stick to them. So again, that can impact on them at times if they've not practiced giving that information, or to getting to the point. Or again, some apprentices do struggle to talk to someone that they've not met before and get that information across. So again, that's where preparation is key, to make sure that they can give that clear and detailed information to show their knowledge, skills and behaviours. So notification of results. So when an apprentice undertakes a component, we do always issue a notification of results, and that will always be shared on ACE360. We do release the results within 5 working days. We do grade the component on the system, and then the notification of results is uploaded to the shared area. Now, this is released once it has gone through the quality assurance process, to make sure that obviously the assessment was conducted fairly and accurately, and then the grade is released to you as providers. So the notification of results is used to by the independent endpoint assessor to justify their assessment decisions. Within the results, the independent endpoint assessors are only able to justify their decision as to why an area is not being achieved. They're not able to advise you on what you need to take in order to address that. We have to remain impartial, so we're not able to say that if you go and do a witness testimony with the manager that will cover it. We're not able to do that. We are purely justifying that they've not achieved this mark because 2 examples of project management tools were required and only 1 was given. We'll always include good practice and strengths shown by the apprentice. The outcome may not be the result that they were hoping, but there is normally some areas of strength or good practice that we've seen from them. So we like to celebrate those as well and pass those on to yourself. So we will always include that in the notification of results. And likewise, if there's anything that we can share with you as providers that we've seen from your end as well in regards to the preparation of the apprentice or anything that we can share. So obviously you can continue that practice, or likewise, if there's anything that maybe you need to adapt. So, for example, we may see a pattern that apprentices from a certain provider come in and they're not giving specific examples, or it may be that in portfolios they're talking hypothetically and giving lots of knowledge-based question and answer books. So we do try and pass that on, so hopefully that obviously any patterns can be amended. So how to make the most of your notification of results. So as I say, these are key documents to you as providers to use to either help the apprentice continue on in their learning and development if they're looking to progress, or obviously if the outcome is not what they expected. So always review and digest the information within the notification of results. Have a read of it, identify what's gone well. If it's not the outcome that was expected, what is it that's led to that outcome? Make sure a copy is provided to the apprentice. Obviously, it's nice to get feedback. As I say, we do put positives in there as well, which is great to receive. And also, if it is something that they need to work on before their reset, it also identifies that to them. Or likewise, there might be feedback in there, or even though the outcome is positive, it may be that we put areas they could look to develop on in the future if they wanted to continue with their development. So, for example, we do get a lot of apprentices that say finance isn't something that they're responsible for, so they may pass, but obviously that may be an area we could put that they could look to work on in the future if they wanted to continue to grow and develop. The notification of results can be used to develop the apprentice and enhance on programme delivery. So, as I say, it can be for future development, or also from your from provider's perspective of how you can enhance your delivery. So, as I say, if we do notice that there's certain patterns or trends, that hopefully you can adjust that to prevent that from future apprentices coming through. Or likewise, anything that we put that is really good practice that hopefully you will continue to apply moving forward. So, for example, we do see some portfolios that are really clearly referenced, easy to navigate and follow, and that's fantastic, and that helps us out as IEAs. So we hope that you would continue that practice with your apprentices. If an apprentice is unsuccessful in a component, the feedback should be used to identify the areas that require further work or development. Obviously, we do appreciate that apprentices are coming to us as signed off as ready, and sometimes it is their confidence or nerves that get the better of them. Sometimes it is areas that they don't have that knowledge, skills or behaviours to give to us. So obviously it may be that we put back in that they were really nervous, so obviously that could be used to work on their confidence and their delivery, or it may be that we detailed that they couldn't identify 2 different leadership styles. So obviously we would expect you guys to pick that up and work on that before the apprentice comes back for their second attempt. So as I say, we detail why it's not being achieved, but we're not able to detail what you need to do to get that apprentice ready. We do try and be clear and detailed as much as possible. So we do tend to break down the criteria individually if it's not, if they haven't achieved, and the reasons against these criteria as to why they've not hit that. So hopefully you can pinpoint what work needs to be done with that apprentice. Again, it may be that you pick up on trends through that as well. So it may be the apprentices are all falling down in regards to the area of finance. So it may be that you look at your delivery in regards to that area, or maybe it's a certain employer where that's falling down if maybe they haven't been exposed to it. As I mentioned, the feedback can be used to develop and grow as a provider as yourselves. As I said, again, from that you can pick up things that are going well in regards to delivery, or maybe things that might need slightly adjusting in order to strengthen that even further, to get those fabulous results for both you and the apprentices, and hopefully on the first attempts.